guys, good morning. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Excellent. We have a couple slides for you to guide the conversation. So, as mentioned, my name is Kara Verholt. I was a corporate client-side marketer for about 15 years. Spent the last 10 years of my career working my way down the West Coast from Amazon to the Walt Disney Company to ending up at the National Football League and leading digital product marketing for them. And then decided to make a shift in 2023. Left the West Coast, relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, and founded my own marketing consulting practice. So I am joined by a great panel of folks today. I'll let them introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start on the end with you, Wesley, and we'll go across and do some short intros before we start to talk about the imperative shifts.
Thank you. My name is Wesley Olson. I am CEO and founder, one of the CEOs and founders of NoCal Ventures. We are a local business development company focusing on community.
How you guys doing? Good morning. My name is Tyler Dandridge, Director of Marketing at Chronicle Heritage Group. I lead all of our international and domestic marketing efforts, digital, and focused on corporate rebrand strategies. So very excited to be here today. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Dave Menken. I am a fractional CMO, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm a full-time, part-time employee.
Hi, my name is Fred Red. I run operations at an engineering-driven company. I have about 30 years experience. I've led I've been CEOs of 2 other organizations and lots of insights and experiences in the marketing realm.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Garcia-Letts. I'm the founder and general manager of Unio Branding. It's a local digital marketing agency that pretty much focuses on web design, web development, branding, and pretty much anything that's related to digital marketing for any type of business here in the US and pretty much across the globe.
Thank you. Great. And I apologize. I'm having trouble with the clicker. If you wouldn't mind, could you advance to the next slide in the presentation? This has our names up there. That would be great. So we have 3 topics that we're going to share with you all today, and I have a few questions prepared for the folks up here, so I'll be directing the questions in different areas. But we're talking about imperative shifts that your marketing must embrace in 2025, and the first imperative is evolving your marketing investment from short-term demand capture to long-term brand building. So we're going to be talking a little bit about branding, investing in brand, the importance of brand, and I'm sure we have a lot of marketers in the room here, so you're probably saying, duh, we understand that. Yes, brand is important, but I think it's one thing, at least in my experience, to understand the importance of brand. It's another thing to convince your leadership to invest in it, invest in brand creative, invest in upper funnel media. Maybe a whole other thing to bring cross-functional stakeholders together to be able to articulate your brand, your mission, your vision, your core set of values. And it may be a whole other thing to evolve your messaging and your creative strategy in favor of emotional brand messaging as opposed to kind of lower funnel features and benefits messaging. Thank you. So those are some of the things that we're going to be diving in today. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I'm going to direct some questions at the group there. And we'll start with you, Peter. Peter runs a branding agency. So we're going to talk about what brand is and what it represents. So Peter, can you talk a little bit about brand building and how we discern the difference from branding and brand?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kara, for that introduction. So as Kara was saying, there's a difference between brand and branding, which is the actions that our company or business take in regards to either their target audience or to create their core values or, let's say, the perception that everybody has towards your brand. So it's important to discern between brand, which is pretty much logo, visual identity, marketing stuff, all the, what we like to call the makeup, right? But what's inside, that's what truly matters. That's what makes a business sustainable throughout time. And we know that branding is usually related to visual identity or corporate identity or how people, let's say, can see your brand and the colors and this and that. And that's all great because it's necessary to be able to stand out or be different from your competitors. However, it's more about your actions, right? I like to use an analogy where it's like meeting someone, like let's say like dating. Nothing's gonna happen like immediately, right? If you want something sustainable, if you want like a long-term relationship, you need to work for it. You need to figure out what the other person wants, what the other person needs. And using that analogy, is usually very helpful for businesses to try to understand their clients, their target audience, and how to divide those groups of audiences. And we're not only talking from a marketing perspective, we're actually talking from a human perspective. So try to figure out what they want. Try to figure out what are they looking for in terms of benefits for themselves. People don't usually buy products just to buy or satisfy a need or a solution. They're looking for something more. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for, okay, if I give you my money, what are you going to do with that money? Okay, I know you're in it for this. You're a business, obviously. But try to aim for, let's say, the big picture. Try to use tools like the flywheel versus the funnel. Funnels are great. I'm pretty sure you guys know what a funnel is. But those are linear. They have a beginning and they have an end. So you're trying to look for something more like an infinite loop, which is more like a circle. That's why we call it the flywheel. So pretty much what that does is it converts leads into customers, but more importantly, it converts customers into promoters. And there's no better publicity than people talking good about your brand and telling their family and their friends, hey man, you gotta check this out. You gotta buy this product. It's amazing. You don't think about price anymore, right? You think about, okay, what's the long term in this? So that's pretty much, let's say in a nutshell, the difference between brand and branding, which, as I said before, are the actions that your business take to create a perception of your brand, if it makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's a good segue into our next question, kind of the distinction between branding and brand, because I've had conversations even in my corporate career with really sophisticated folks and leaders where there is a misconception that brand is vanity, right? It's the visual identity, it's a nice to have. And then there's a deeper double click into that, right? Because if the brand is not only the external facing ethos of the company, it's also a core set of mission, vision, values that guide your business internally. Brand is an imperative to the business, right? And I think that's kind of the shift that we want to discuss in the conversation that we want to discuss here. So, Tyler, I'm going to shift a question to you. What are some ways that marketers can convince their leadership and key stakeholders that brand isn't just a nice to have? It's an imperative for the business, which requires investment behind that. So sometimes that's a difficult conversation. But how would you recommend marketers and business leaders alike approach that conversation?
Sure. You know, it's a really compelling idea, and thanks for that question. This idea of how do we motivate our C-suite or the top leadership who makes decisions to invest in what we know is really valuable lead generation strategies. To me, it's about galvanizing attention, right? It's understanding what are the ways that company is going to grow. Usually, it's by converting attention or leads into your financial department, whether it's top of the funnel or mid-funnel customer journey. And, you know, I think it can be lost on folks if they don't give attention to what builds such a large brand. And usually that's done by making sure that you have stakeholders at every part of that decision-making process, right? And you can actually think about the modern brands that we know and love today, whether it's Nike or Amazon or things of that nature. These brands were not built overnight. They were built with activities. They had a Michael Jordan as a brand influencer, or they had a Steve Jobs as their CEO to champion all of the innovation. What we know today is that innovation is that thin layer of technology that precedes that marketing effort. So usually you have to wrap any type of brand activity that we have around that innovation and make sure that you can communicate that down funnel and downstream to all parties involved, of course. So I do think it's really important to make sure that you can have that alignment across the board and make sure you're communicating that effectively.
Yes, and I think with that, sustainability is a key piece of the discussion, because some of the ways that I have communicated this, either internally in my corporate marketing career to some of the clients that I work with, your brand is going to help future-proof your business as well. It may help you distinguish yourself as competitive threats grow, new entrants come into the marketplace. Your brand is really what helps create that kind of emotional connection and that relationship with your customers that are going to outlast some of those other changes and pressures in the marketplace. And so I think a key piece of having that conversation internally is how we value brand and some of the KPIs that we look at as marketers and how we are communicating that value back to internal stakeholders in our leadership. So, Peter, I'm going to ask you another question about how KPIs factor into this, because something that I have seen in my corporate career is shifting the dialogue from ROI. I'm sure many of us have been in those scenarios where it's all about, in-quarter ROI, in-month ROI, in ROI to justify our spend, but that can be very limiting as we talk about brands. So talk to me about some of those shifts and how we measure impact.
Yes, absolutely. So KPIs, key performance indicators, ROIs, all these, let's say, fancy terms, these are great tools to measure the progress. However, you can have, let's say, pretty good numbers to start if you're only focusing on sales, but all of a sudden you lose attention to who you are, as Tyler was saying, as the personality of the brand. And then people start to identify, hey, maybe this company is not as good as I think they were. So I'm going to stop buying from them. I'm going to start buying from someone else. And this translates to less money, lower ROIs. So instead of just focusing on fancy numbers, I would suggest business owners and business leaders to focus more on, let's say, long-term sustainability. Okay, try to understand why people are buying from you rather than just selling them a product or a service. What are you doing for that people or that consumer to circle back and buy from you again? So I think KPIs are, as I said before, KPIs are a great tool to measure, but they're usually 6 months to 12-month type of tool, and it's just to have like a sense of progress. So they are very, very important. However, the big picture is an infinite loop. You got to think, instead of just ROI, how can I make people more connected to my brand? Because sales are going to become sort of like a domino effect, like a snowball effect, if you will. And not so much like a, right now, let's look all the ways that we can sell, call everybody and be pushy, because people don't like to purchase that way anymore. So I'm an inbound marketing type of guy, so I usually like to use marketing as a way of reaching new audiences and be like, hey, this is who we are, and if you connect with us, that's awesome. Let's do business together. And if you don't, I respect that. Eventually, my doors are always open. So that's a pretty good approach instead of just trying to focus on fancy numbers, let's say.
Yeah, I'll give a quick example of that kind of evolution in the conversation. A client that I was working with in the e-commerce space had very strong ROI, very kind of heavy performance marketing, lower funnel, media spend. ROI was great. ROI was really strong. But when you really dug into the data and where the sales were coming from, their retention rate was very low. So they were attracting new customers at a highly efficient rate, which ROI is an efficiency metric, not always an effectiveness metric. Acquiring customers at a very efficient rate, but retention and frequency were very low. So we had to shift the dialogue as we were talking about investing in brands, and part of my role was to convince the client that it was time to start moving some of their media dollars upper funnel. But we looked at customer lifetime value, right? We started to evolve into what is the relationship that we're building with our customers so that we can look at our marketing investment more holistically in terms of effectiveness, right? And there's other downstream ways to be able to do that. So I think that's a very important point. Final point here on this topic is really the role that channels play in this. Some channels are better suited than others to be establishing your brand. Some channels are built for awareness and reach, while other channels are built for those kind of lower funnel conversions. So Wesley, I'm going to address this question to you, and then certainly we'll have time for others to weigh in here. But how can we evaluate social media's evolving role? Because social media, I've seen it kind of play lower funnel, mid funnel, or upper funnel. How do we evolve social media's role as an attention hub for brand awareness and discovery?
Well, it's 100% an attention hub, and it's a matter of where you start. There's so many channels. I think you have to be involved in every channel of social media, and each one is a little bit different. Today, your client's attention span is very short. You have 3 seconds, basically, to grab their attention and keep them. We like to use social media as a way to retain the client. That's your greatest ROI is your biggest expense is attracting them, getting them, keeping them. Whole different thing. I hadn't heard the flywheel analogy. I love that. We're going to incorporate that for sure. So it's also engagement, right? So many people, so many companies mass produce social media and get it out there, and they're concerned with the engagement they're getting. How many likes are they getting? How far are they reaching? When I think sometimes they lose a little bit of what it's about, which is engaging with them. I feel like if you're not doing it yourself, you should have a department that is actually engaging with the people out there, going to the platforms of your clients and engaging there. It's a further reach.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I like to think about, how are you adding value in social media to your customers, right? Could be educational, could be developing that relationship where it really is that kind of more upper funnel brand communications.
I'd also,
Please.
yeah, and I'd also like to add on heels of what Wes articulated, it's about consistency of message, and it's not a one-time deal or once a month. It's a continuous stream of branding or social media outreach that, in the long term, gets the value that you need.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues that I've been a proponent of with my current firm. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a nice segue into our second topic that we're going to touch here, which really has to do with more of channel strategy and the customer journey. I'm not really one that's big for New Year's resolutions, but I like to identify themes for myself that I apply to both my personal life and my professional work. And my theme for this year is simplicity, something that I've talked a lot with my clients, and I think it plays a role in the customer journey. Because, Wesley, as you pointed out, with multiple social media channels, there's so much pressure, especially as you think about your brand presence and establishing your brand presence. There's so much pressure today to have a presence on every single channel and feel like you're connecting with consumers everywhere. And some brands are able to do that based on their resources, based on their budget, but many are not, right? And so kind of approaching the customer journey with simplicity in mind and really making sure you're delivering impact is one of the key themes and evolutions that we wanted to discuss here for 2025. So, Dave, I'm going to start with a question for you. In preparation for this panel, we talked a lot about how customers have short attention spans, but also high expectations. And so figuring out what does this mean for brands when they're assessing the platforms to include in their customer journey, how do you factor in some of these understandings about customers' patience and their willingness and ways in which they will interact with brands?
I'm sorry, I kind of zoned out halfway through that question.
That's okay.
I'm just kidding. So I think the biggest thing is understanding what the platform is used for. Each platform has a different story to tell, right? And so just kind of employing the same content and blasting it across every platform just is kind of it's not a win-win strategy for anybody. It's easy. It's an easy thing to do, but and I think also just working with customers to understand what platforms actually work for them, right? I've had so many, and I think I said this yesterday, but so many people have asked me if they should be on TikTok, and it's, unless you're like a pretty girl that does jump rope, it's not probably the place for you, right? Or if you're not willing to be in a Walmart and be like, oh, I'm going to do this dance fad, so many businesses we're told as, kind of the marketing world is like, oh, you need to do this because other people are doing it. Whereas the question isn't, how many platforms you should be on is, are you actually on the right ones, telling the right stories at the right time to the right people? Because otherwise it's a total wasted effort.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's a challenge for marketers to demonstrate impact in the channels that they're in. I mean, I've been in those circumstances in my corporate marketing career where maybe you're kind of looking at revenue performance for the week and you're trending like 5% below goal, right? And then the question always comes up, what else can we do, right? What other levers can we pull?
And I think we should be
challenge.
I think we should be willing to push back
Yes.
and say, yes, I understand, that this company's doing this, but it doesn't really apply for
Yes.
us.
Exactly.
And as you said, it takes time, right?
Yeah.
To Dave's point, every platform has a different demographic to it. Who's your avatar?
Mm-hmm.
What demographic is your avatar for your business, for your brand, for your branding? And go after that one and understanding which one it is.
Yes, absolutely right. I think along with the pressure to be in multiple channels is also the pressure to use every single, MarTech tool available out there. And so I think there's been a lot of conversation around AI, but it's a good segue into how technology and tools factor into this conversation as well, right? Because I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I have felt the weight of every time I log on to LinkedIn, I I'm seeing if you're not doing this, you're failing. If you're not doing that, you're failing. This tool has AI. This tool does this. And I'm now, getting overwhelmed by questions from my clients like, should we be doing this? What's the right approach? And frankly, I am still working with folks that are solving marketing technology use cases from the last 20 years, trying to get their CRM up to speed, right? And so that's where I like to apply the lens of simplicity to make sure we're doing the right things. We're focused on quality over quantity. But I think all of us can probably comment around, the role of AI, but kind of striking that right balance as we talk about brand credibility and establishing authenticity in this process. So I think there's a few of us here that can talk to this. Maybe Tyler, if you're willing to kick us off. But I think this is a good topic for a few of us to weigh in on.
Sure. I think in kind of to your last point, Wesley, that avatar, right? We need to isolate where our ICP is, our ideal customer profile, and understand what they are seeking from us in a dynamic way, right? If I took the pulse of this room specifically, I would know that the majority of these folks could be galvanized on LinkedIn, and their attention would maybe retained on Facebook. If this crowd was significantly younger, Dave, to your last point, this idea of, are we on TikTok or should we be on TikTok? I think that would be a different conversation. I think the role of emerging technologies, whether it's in AI or, like you just mentioned, Kara, acknowledging where your tech stack could be and some of the innovations there, I think it's really compelling to understand, as business owners and business leaders, marketing serves a valuable role, but the execution of our tactics really can be sped up in a specific way. For us personally, I've been able to downsize our team by utilizing AI to reproduce roles that I would have hired out to specific staff members, right? And so for us, it's creating batch content at scale and being able to reproduce video messaging, short-form video, long-form video, testimonials, blogs, and including those things in some of our downstream and channel marketing efforts. And so I think that's where the power is really from my perspective. And again, it's something I mentioned yesterday. It's, AI is iterative, it's not creative. So we have to be creative and be those decision makers that are bringing the tool and pushing those use cases in different ways to make sure that possibility is utilized, right? And not to say that we're wasting our dollars in other places as well.
Yeah, going back to our first topic around brand and the flywheel that you're trying to achieve, I think that underscores the importance of the brand work, that foundational work up front, because we now have tools at our disposal that can replicate content. But that doesn't mean you don't have to do the hard work up front to really establish, again, what are our brand values? How does that translate into messaging pillars? How am I taking those messaging pillars and actually translating that into a content and creative strategy that can then be, replicated based on the channels that we're trying to use in our customer journey? So I think those two things are very closely linked, but would love, I'll kind of leave it open for a minute if anybody else wants to comment on the AI piece or how we think about technology in our journeys.
Yeah, in our case, for example, we use AI as a head start, right? But it's funny and it's a little bit ironic because I feel that now that AI is there, it's become even harder to create an actual website for our clients, because now everybody can create a website with just clicking a button, but then it's not authentic, so people don't connect. So you end up spending money instead of investing money. So it's a tricky situation. But there's a saying in the digital marketing world that AI is not going to take people's job. People who know how to use AI are going to take the other people that don't know how to use AI jobs. So still, AI needs a lot of human interaction, needs to learn from us. So we're a long way from just clicking things to make them happen. And if we ever do reach that point, I think it's going to become more of a thing. All right, so show me your human side. Show me what you can do beyond just using AI, because everybody has access to AI. So what makes you different? So it's going to become even trickier to be able to deliver an authentic message out there for your target audience. So I think AI is a great tool, but as a business owner, you need to understand AI is not a substitute for human talent. It's the other way around. It's just a way to enhance and, let's say, accelerate and make the processes more efficient, but it's not something where you can push humans aside. It's completely the other way around. I would even go as far as to say we try to use as less AI as possible, because that's what makes us different as a digital marketing agency. So yes, AI is great and all, but it's you still need to find a way to integrate it to your business without actually having everything become robotic. And then just to add on what Tyler and what Wesley was saying, it's funny that we all have different personalities, even when we're using different platforms. So when we're on LinkedIn, we're like all professional and we're dressed fancy, right? And oh my God, I'm gonna comment like, "Hey, Tyler, congratulations on your award on the Fueled Conference, man. Great." If we're on Facebook, we're like laid back, like, "Hey, let's all be chill and let's comment. Hey, how's it going, Tyler? Good job, man. I saw you did great at the Fuel Conference. Awesome." If we're on Instagram, it's more of a visual thing. So Instagram is great for people that are trying to sell visual products, like let's say clothes, shoes, makeup, etc. And TikTok is really good for younger people. So you need to identify not only where your target audience is, but how they behave. Because when you're trying to reach new audiences, a lot of people think that you just filter them by demographics, interests, and yes, I'm going to target 25 to 35-year-old males. That's too broad. You need to look at their behavior. Do they purchase a lot online? Do they not? Do they like to open emails? Do they rather just have someone call them? Do they like being on Instagram to buy things, or do they prefer to buy them on Google? So even from that perspective, I would suggest all of us to try to have an approach where you think of your target audience not as a person, but as a like hybrid person that's able to be a professional, laid back person, sports guy, makeup girl, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to add that on top of what you guys said.
Excellent.
I apparently need to think my LinkedIn status. You may have noticed the picture on the slide is of me posing with a Sasquatch, and my personality isn't different on LinkedIn than it is. Not to say that you're wrong. I'm probably wrong myself. I'm probably too relaxed. But yeah, no, I was just gonna say I think there's too much reliance on tech and a total. Marketers have kind of forgotten the art of kind of that human connection through stories, because I think throughout the history of man, it's people learned what they, certainly what they didn't understand or what they couldn't explain. It was explained through stories, and I think that's what marketing really is we connect with people on a story basis. So yes, I use AI all the time, but I use it as a more of an efficiency tool, but you still need that kind of human element to it to tell a human story to connect with people. Otherwise, it's and then talking about KPIs and all this kind of stuff. Yes, they're important, but really at the end of the day, I always tell my clients that if I'm working with you and you're making more money now than you're spending on me, then that's a good conversation to have, because then you're probably not going to fire me. Right? I'm selfish. I want them to make money so they continue paying the invoice, but that's just me.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to add, in addition to me being in my current engineering profession, I'm also on 5 other boards, and I've had the opportunity to create videos and presentations using AI, voiceovers, using editing tools that make the process faster, quicker, and more effective. And the boards have embraced this product, and there's no going back from here. It's only to go forward. But again, it's the human element to do the storyboard, to create the content, but it's faster, quicker, and more effective. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, AI can't pick up on emotions, right? It's not. It's a very unemotional tool. Whereas understanding what the emotion is, what you want to give people the feels about, that's kind of that human element.
Absolutely.
And it'll never replace Alfred.
that's true.
The human element is a good segue to our last topic that we're going to talk about here, which I don't really think can be automated, at least not yet, and that's getting your decision makers, the CEO, the CFO, on the same page as your marketing strategy, which can be challenging. And so, marketers often struggle to get buy-in, especially when we're talking about things like brand investments. evolving some of those KPIs, right? In many of my roles, finance, when I'm going through my budget allocations and my budget proposal, they're asking me, what's the ROI on this? And so there's a lot that's wrapped up into these conversations, and we understand the complexity of that. But Frederick, I'm going to start with you here, given your background. So you've had operational, CEO, business development roles. As you mentioned, you're on a number of different boards, and I think you can help represent kind of the C-suite and the leadership perspective here. Talk to us about the most effective ways to communicate marketing's long-range plans and long-range value to the C-suite.
Great question. And usually the knee-jerk reaction is, what's the ROI? Why am I going to do this? And one of the things you have to keep in mind is that the CFO person, are there any CFOs in the room before I speak? Okay, great. Is usually engaged in monitoring the financial health of the company. They're not usually engaged in making business decisions that drive the income for the company. So the best way to get them on your team is to involve them into your strategy decisions so they understand how the business is run, so they understand where you're going strategically. That way you can get them on board. And we talked about customer lifetime value versus customer acquisition. Give them numbers. Give them a pro forma of, for example, whatever industry you're in. One of the things that I did with my CFO, I said, he said, well, why should we invest in XYZ? I said, well, great question. Our competitors are spending 10%, or the market value for what we're spending should be around 10 or 12%. And we're being beaten out by our competitors, and this is what they're doing. Right then, when you put it in that vernacular, their attention is like, oh, okay, if they're doing it, well, we should be doing it. So those type of things, it's very important to get the CFO on board. But the main thing is for them to understand the business, how you generate income, and what those strategic decisions are, and include them in the process. And then it's an easier sell.
Yeah, I have given that advice. I work with a lot of undergraduate students and early marketing professionals, and I've given that advice to say, especially if you're in a big kind of corporate and siloed environment, go make friends with your finance counterpart. Make sure you clearly understand how they are looking at goals, how they are looking at the budget, what they're looking from you for a quarterly planning process, and how you can have that dialogue together. And make sure that you're speaking their language, or you're understanding how to speak each other's language.
Yeah, and to that point, really understand, take a mini course on finance just to understand what their language is. I have an MBA, so I can speak the language, but it also helps if you can bridge that gap and understand what they're looking for and what their lens is and what their challenges are.
Yes, because they can be very helpful stakeholders in looking at customer lifetime value, because there's a lot of different ways to look at that, and it can be sometimes challenging to kind of define exactly how we want to look at that and what's the time horizon for the lifetime and all of that. So if you engage your finance counterparts in those dialogues, I think you're all going to be more successful in the future. So you brought up an interesting last point, and then we'll save the last couple of minutes for questions. But talking about competitive threats, right? I've had success in that, kind of positioning some of the future risks to evolve that conversation on why do we need to invest in brand, why do we need to invest now, why do we need to have upper funnel, media spending as part of our proposal. I'm just going to open it up to the group here in terms of kind of any last advice in terms of positioning that conversation for the decision makers that you're having that dialogue with.
Yeah, I'd like to start off by one of the things that I forgot to mention is that I also do a robust risk analysis in terms of what the threats are, what the opportunities are. If we identify all the risks that could happen toward a certain initiative, how we're going to overcome that risk financially, operationally, and that put everything on the table so that there's a clear path to success.
Maybe just to add there, I think you bring up a great point. It's this idea of like having a performance audit. I think for most businesses, there's this huge question around, are we spending enough in marketing, or are our dollars stretching in the most effective way? I would say there should always be a healthy conversation, at least quarterly, if not month over month, to assess from a profit center standpoint where you're producing your leads, right? So depending on your funnel setup or how you orchestrate your lead gen from a brand standpoint, usually Fortune 500 companies spend about 25 to 27% of their revenue on marketing, whether active ad campaigns or brand strategies. And I think it's understanding, can you reverse engineer what has been successful for you, or to your point again, doing competitor analysis to isolate specific things that are very beneficial or have been very beneficial for other folks in your sector. We do a lot of RFPs and bidding processes. So before I came to the team, we didn't have a really outstanding marketing budget because a lot of the attention or lead gen for us was produced in winning a client through the bidding process. So it was this whole understanding of, can we make sure that the Zeitguide for attention is funneled through our marketing efforts, and we're not just relying on a bidding process to win clients, right? And doing that audit, that performance review to understand where you're producing those leads, I think is very important to do at least some part during your analysis as well.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we have about 5 minutes left, so maybe we'll open it up for any questions in the room. Anything that we can answer? Please.
That's a pretty good question. Time is something that no one has a crystal ball to know what's going to happen. So marketing is a lot of trying stuff out. Usually we do A and B test, or as Tyler and Frederick were saying, we use benchmark to try to compare ourselves. And instead of seeing things like, hey, I'm spending or investing 10K a month on marketing, try to put it into a perspective where you're comparing yourself with what others are doing in terms of, hey, other people are investing 20K. So you're actually investing 50%, of what the rest of the people are investing. So doing benchmark usually works a lot to try to understand what's your starting point. I'm going to go ahead and say there's no way to define a time range on how things are going to end up evolving. However, you can have KPIs, which are key performance indicators, and be like, okay, on the first trimester, I'm trying to get to a 50% engagement rate. And usually what we suggest is having between 4 and 6 KPIs. Those KPIs are going to revolve around what your biggest interests are as a business. So let's say one KPI can be engagement rate. Another one can be conversion rate. How much are you selling through your website? How many people are coming to your website? And what's the percentage that are actually adding to the cart or contacting your sales team? So those KPIs, at the end of the day, if you were successful, you mark it as a 1. If you were not successful, you mark it as a 0. Then you add all those up, and if it's 6, you add them all up, you divide it into the same amount. So let's say 0, 1, 1, 1, 0. Divide that into 6, and you're going to get a 0.8, 0.9. If you're above 0.7, you're on the right path. If you're below 0.6, you need to change something out there. So instead of thinking it as, hey, we need to get there in 3 months, because you can tell when someone's desperate, right? Just as dating, like the analogy that I gave before, you can tell when someone's just desperate to sell. And people don't like that, right? That's counterproductive, actually. So I would use key performance indicators to try to measure what I'm doing good in terms of getting people to where I want them to be. So if you're selling online, that will be to your website or social media channels. If you're have a physical store, that will be how many people are coming because of the things that I'm doing as a marketing team. And there are a lot of tools, man, that you don't need like a big team to create impactful stories or impactful results. So I would just suggest having a way to measure that, but rather than using a time frame, I would probably use just performance indicators.
Great. I think we're at time, but here, these QR codes just go to our LinkedIn profile, so if anyone wants to connect, ask more questions